particular minute. Of course, today we have a jam-packed session for you. We'll be having a conversation later on at around 8 with models. We're going to discuss matters to do with the industry and how the industry is at right now, so you don't want to miss that particular conversation. But let's start with the day's top stories. And the Principal Secretary for Education, Julius Bitok, has announced that the government will extend the reporting of grade 10 learners to ensure no child is locked out. Now, speaking at the Alliance Boys High School, where he assessed the admission process, Professor Bitok urged parents seeking transfers to take their children to the schools they've been called to, adding that the selection process was done in a transparent manner and took into consideration learners' needs. Now, the ministry has also pledged to engage the Teachers Service Commission to hire more teachers for technical subjects like woodwork, committing to ensure all pathways are fully provided for. Now, the admission rate for Cluster 1 schools countrywide is at 91% so far, with the lower clusters reporting dismissal reporting.
So far, we are confident, and we know that the numbers are growing slowly, but we are confident that by tomorrow, these numbers will be up. We are confident that by the end of this process, all the students will have been placed successfully. Our expectation is that we shall have 100% transition, because we have enough spaces in grade 10 senior school to take all the learners.
Right, moving on, President William Ruto has defended the Nyota project, through which the government has been disbursing funds to the youth, terming it as a key to unlock limitless potential among the country's youthful populace. Now, speaking at the Machakos Stadium, as he presided over the 6th edition of the disbursement of the business support funds to 5,900 youth drawn from Kitui, Makueni and Machakos counties, Ruto yet again lashed out at the Wiper Party leader Kalonzo Musyoka for opposing a project that he believes will drive the youth out of the unemployment crisis. He at the same time reiterated his resolve to catapult the country to Singapore status, even as his deputy Kithure Kindiki branded those opposed to the country's development as enemies of the state.
People of Kenya are not voting machines. They also want to know how are they going to change their status? How are they going to make progress? What is the plan for them to improve their lives, to grow their jobs, to have revenue, to be able to progress? The challenge we have had is a challenge of leadership. Mtu tu anataka kupigiwa makofi. He has no plan, he has no idea, he has no agenda, he has no program, he has no vision.
Ile bottom up ya 2022 ndio hii. Ile pesa mfukoni ya 2022 ndio hii. Na hii ndio bottom up economic transformation agenda ambayo itapeleka Kenya mbele mpaka ikuwe first world economy.
Right, moving on, Kiambu Governor Kimani Wamatangi has suffered yet another setback after the High Court issued orders freezing bank accounts belonging to him, his wife, and his children. Now, the court orders also extend two accounts held by 10 other individuals in connection with a separate 813 million Kenya shillings corruption case. Now, the freeze follows an application by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, that is the EACC, which is investigating allegations of corruption and unexplained wealth linked to the funds in question. The orders will remain in force pending the hearing and determination of the EACC's application. This comes a day after a multi-million property sitting at the railway's land near Nyayo Stadium was demolished. Now, the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, that is KNCCI, has announced the opening of its Dubai office as part of the new trade solution aimed at addressing up to 90% of challenges faced by Kenyan exporters. And according to KNCCI President Dr. Eric Ruto, Kenyan traders have been losing over 6.7 billion Kenya shillings annually in trade-related deals, an issue that necessitated the opening of the Dubai offices to mitigate against such through the verification of trade partners.
Estimating that per week, from the reports that we receive, we are losing approximately 3 containers of fresh produce. That comes to a total of around 150 containers in a year. And if you are to look at an average of 5 million Kenyan shillings, you can be able to calculate in terms of invoice value. Yes, in terms of meat exports, approximately 20 to 25% are not paid. That's approximately 6 billion. So we are in the range of around 7 billion in terms of what we are losing. So that is what we want to address. And most likely that is what has happened to the 3,000 exporters who they are in our portal, but currently they are dormant, they are not active in terms of exports and international trade.
Right now, dozens of pupils at La Romoro Primary School in Baringo South are now forced to learn under trees after the Kenya Forest Service, that is KFS, demolished the school over claims that it's sitting within the protected Mukutani forest. Now, the move has sparked outrage and concern among residents who say destruction of the school will deny hundreds of learners a conducive learning environment. Teachers report that students are struggling to learn in harsh door conditions, facing heat, dust, and livestock disruptions.
Endelea tu kufundisha bila madawati, bila vitabu, hiyo challenge zote nje ya darasa chini ya miti, na tukashangaa kwa nini shule kabomolewa wakati wa Kenya, watoto wa Kenya wengine wanaendelea kusoma bila matatizo yoyote. Na mbona serikali hawaongei kwamba nini litafanyika baada ya hii? Walimu ambao wako hapa waendelee kufundisha ama wafanye namna gani? Wanafunzi pia hatujapata ripoti yote kwamba waende wapi ama wafanywe nini.
Kufunza nje ni ngumu sana. Mwezi huu ni mwezi ambao jua ni kali. Kuna a lot of disturbance. Kuna wanyama wanapita kando, watu, so concentration is very low. Psychologically they are tortured because they are finding that their class is not there, so they start questioning.
Nilisoma hapa nikafikisha, nilienda mpaka class 2. Hiyo maneno ikakuwa imetokea, mimi nikatoka, na hiyo nilinifanya mimi hata mimi mwenyewe sikupata mambo za shule. Tukakuwa tunahama, hakuna hata mahali pa kuishi, tunaishi msituni, mimi nikakosa kwenda shule.
Now, education leaders and stakeholders have called on security officers to strengthen raids against illegal alcohol and drug trade near schools in Murang'a County. Now, the warning comes as such activities continue to pose a major threat to the well-being and development of students, particularly in the Kenol area.
Nilisikia mambo ya scholarship, nikapigiwa simu, nikasema Mungu basi amesaidia huyu mtoto. Sasa tukakuja Luda Primary, tukaanzia ile siku alianza kunini mambo ya scholarship hapo Luda Primary. Nangana tu na huyu mtoto kila siku mpaka kiwango mtoto anasema asipoenda kwa shule afadhali ni nyonge niende nifuate baba yake, kwa sababu hakuna haja ni kuone vile unateseka. Anajaribu kusama na kujimana kila kitu, na kata hata mama marafiki.
Tunalia sana, hatulali usingizi. Kila siku tunaamka Ludo Mixed. Kila siku tunaamka Ludo Mixed. Tumeshindwa pale pa kwenda. Tulikuwa tunaomba sana. Saidia hiyo namba yenye imebaki. Isirudi tu hivyo ikiwa blank.
Kwa nini mtu anaweza nyimwa nafasi ile hali amequalify ku hiyo points Kenya wamempea? Hiyo maneno si mzuri kabisa.
Mtoto kupelekwa private school si kwamba mtu alikuwa anajiweza, ni mtu tu alimsaidia. So mimi ninaomba iangaziwe na iangaliwe zaidi.
Right, still on matters education, more than 200 students expected to join grade 10 in Turkana County have been denied education sponsorship, prompting them to protest at the county education offices in Lodwar. They complained that despite presenting themselves and going through the necessary verification process at the offices, they were still denied the funding. Now, speaking to journalists in Lodwar, parents of children with disabilities and orphans said that despite having children with special needs, they were deprived of opportunity and to access the scholarship. Now, the Kenya government, through the education scholarship program, had allocated 500 slots for students in Turkana who scored 45 marks and above, but parents argue that the threshold is too high, leaving many students unable to secure sponsorship. All right, moving on, security officers have been called upon to intensify raids against illegal alcohol and drug trade near educational institutions in Murang'a County. Now, the appeal was made by education leaders and stakeholders, highlighting that such activities pose a serious threat to the well-being and development of students, particularly in the Kenol area of Murang'a. Right, patients face major disruptions after Transmara West Hospital in Kilgoris was suddenly closed following an invasion by health workers in the early hours of Wednesday, leaving hospital staff and injured patients stranded. And according to some hospital officials who wished to remain anonymous, armed intruders entered the hospital at night with a patient involved in an accident, sparking chaos in the hospital. Take a look.
Nilikuwa naleta mtoto, nilikuwa nakuja kutibu hapa hospitali na nakuja kukuta hospitali nimefunga. Sijui sasa atapeleka wapi mtoto saa hii.
Nilikuwa nimevunjika mguu, sasa nilikuwa nimekujia x-ray na nimepata hospitali imefungwa. Sasa hata tukikuja hatupati madawa. Unaambiwa ndio nunue nje, wanakuandikia na kuambia ndio nunue.
Nimetoka Lolgorian. Nilikuwa nimetumwa scanning. Kwa sasa nimepata hospitali wamefunga. Sasa sijui usaidizi tutatoa wapi, na ni hapa tu ndio tunategemea ndio nini ya serikali.
Right, moving on, Global Cathedral Church has issued a call for peace and political calm as campaigns ahead of the general elections intensify across the country. Now, the church announced preparations for a national prayer event scheduled for January 25th at the KICC auditorium, emphasizing its role in praying for the nation, especially during heightened political tensions. Now, speaking during the preparations, Bishop Moses Turele urged the government to strengthen democracy and ensure politics aligns with peace. He also called on politicians from all parties to avoid divisive rhetoric that could split the nation or threaten its unity.
Maombi, tukianza kuanza mwaka wetu na maombi, Mungu atatubariki, atabariki watoto wetu, atabariki wazee wetu, atabariki wamama wetu, atabariki nchi yetu, kwa sababu hata president na wafanyikazi wote wa serikali, wa judiciary, hata na wapi wote wanakuja ili tukaweze kuanza mwaka na maombi, diposa Mungu wetu akaweze kutubariki tukiendelea mbele na kazi.
A prayer service that is coming on the 25th of January 2026 at KICC. This prayer is to pray for this nation. This nation needs a prayer. Prayer has a special place in the nation of Kenya because there are things that this nation is facing that would be only solved by prayer. So I want political players, specifically those who are looking for elected position or those who are looking to undo each other. We want to ask them to be peaceful in their campaign, not to use in.
Right, moving on, residents from Elsa Village, Kajiado County, staged a protest against the transfer of John Bosco Asali, the head teacher of Elsa Secondary School, citing his contributions to improving academics and leadership at the institution. Now, the residents who have children enrolled at the school opposed the decision by the Teacher Service Commission, that is TSC, to transfer the head teacher without consulting the school's board of management or other key stakeholders. Now, they also blamed the Isiolo TSC office for making the decision favoring a single individual without proper authorization or justification.
Hata kisa na mahana ni kwamba matokeo ya 2025 KCSE results zilitoka na tumefanya maajabu katika mtihani. Watoto wetu wamepita wote, tuko na miniscore ya 5.4 na badala sisi tuserebulate ni kama tunalia kwa sababu tumestukia kwamba mwalimu wetu mkuu Bwana Bosco Ekale ametolewa, amepigwa transfer.
Ekale alipoingia kama principal alikuta miniscore yetu iko chini, tulikuwa 2.8 na sasa ameiondoa kutoka 2.8 ametufikisha 5.4.
Wanafunzi ambaye hata amefanya mtihani hii mwaka ni wangu, mmoja ni wangu na wamepita. Sasa wakati tulisikia kwamba Ekale amepigwa transfer, tulishikwa na butwa tukiwa wazazi, hasa sisi kina mama.
Right, that particular story takes us on our first breather here on The Drift, but when we come back, we'll tell you what exactly is happening in the world of the daily today, what the newspapers are actually saying. Don't go too far.
Transforming your world.
All right, welcome back to the program. You're watching The Drift. Now let's take a look on what's making headlines on the dailies today. And I'm having the Daily Nation and the Standard newspaper this particular morning, dated the 16th day of January 2026. Now let's start with the Daily Nation, and top story on the Daily Nation is why Trump spared Kenya. All right, and strategic allies that include immigration matters. Immigration. Kenya is the only EAC country where citizens are allowed to get long-term immigrant visas starting January 21st. And Kenyans are required to pay a refundable visa bonds of at least 645,000 Kenya shillings to visit the US, unlike Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, among others. And on matters trade, the 10% receptional tariff for Kenya set by Trump in April 2025 is among the lowest. All right, and Kenya is one of the 32 African countries to continue preferential trade ties with the US after House voted to extend AGOA Pact. And matters alliances, despite concerns raised by American lawmakers in 2025, Kenya is still one of the 20 countries in the US non-NATO ally status. On matters aid, Kenya was the first country to enter a pact with the US, allowing sending $1.6 billion in the healthcare fund over 5 years. Right, and of course, we will remember when Trump was coming to the helm of power. There was some discussions revolving the aid of the US, that is the United States, to African countries. And today, the Daily Nation, paints a picture of why Trump spared Kenya. It is on the front page, and of course on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation. Of course, it continues to say, with Joe Biden's exit from the White House, Kenya was expected to lose its privileged standing under the return of President Trump. Yet the country has so far dodged hostile sanctions imposed on other nations, including the latest US visa processing bans. Read by why Kenya remains in Washington's good books. That's a story you can get on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation. Of course, now let's take a look on what's happening in Uganda. And Ugandans vote amid poll kits failure rigging claims. And that's a story on page 7, where it says Ugandan's president and leader of the ruling National Resistance Movement Party, Yoweri Museveni, and his main challenger Bobby Wine of the National Party platform. Yesterday, there are their pictures there when they were casting their votes in yesterday's general elections in that particular country. Of course, you will remember that the Ugandan government actually, a day before the day of elections, they actually shut down their internet in a move. They say it's to safeguard the elections. Now let's take a look on how the exercise was yesterday in Uganda. Now, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni voiced confidence about extending his rule into the 5th decade during a tense national election held under an internet blackout following a campaign marred by violence. Now, Museveni told reporters after casting his ballot in western Uganda that he expected to win with 80% of votes if there is no cheating, dismissing the protest or the prospect of an aspect of the upset victory by popular singer Bobby Wine. Now, the election is widely seen as a test of the 81-year-old leader's politically strengthened and ability, to avoid the kind of unrest that has rocked neighbors in Tanzania. Of course, in Kenya, speculations mounts about his eventual succession, and Museveni, who has positioned Uganda as a security partner to Western nations since coming to power in 1986, campaigned on a slogan of, quote-unquote, protecting the gains, vowing to maintain peace and lift the country into middle-income status. Now, the 43-year-old Bobby Old Wine, nicknamed Ghetto President for his humble origins, has appealed to young people angry about the scarce economic opportunities in a country where the average age is just over 16. And Museveni has warned that, security forces will deal firmly with any elections day protest. There were no reports of protest as polling stations began to close after 5 p.m. and ballot counting began. Right, of course, we shall be keeping you up to speed, with the stories unfolding in Uganda. Of course, we shall be telling you who exactly is or the won that particular election. All right. Now let's talk about matters healthcare. That is on page 10 of the Daily Nation as well. Cambry explores promising plant in cancer drug search. And of course, cancer have been claiming people, especially in this, current age. And the scientists at the Kenya Medical Research Institute, that is Cambry, have confirmed potential anti-cancer properties in a plant traditionally used to manage breast and prostate cancer. Now, in the findings published in the journal PLOS 1, the researchers say the study fills a critical gap and marks the first phase before the progressing to animal studies and human clinical trials later. Now, the plant, scientifically known as Griwa villosa and locally referred to as Mubu, is commonly used by the Mbere community in Embu County. Apart from cancer, Mubu has been used in traditional medicine and to manage dysentery, cholera, wounds, and sores. Right? Of course, when they finally find these properties to cancer, it would be a relief because many people have actually succumbed to cancer. Right? Now let's take a look on other stories making headlines here on the Daily Nation. And now let's talk matters corridors of justice. And Nyakio murder fight exposes fugitive after a year on run. That is a story on page 2 of the Daily Nation. And dressed in yellow hoodie, there is a man there, the murder suspect Ken Kimathi, who appears at the Kiambu Law Courts on Wednesday over the October 14th of 2024 killing of Seth Nyakio. And dressed in the yellow hoodie, blazoned with the words "Girl Boss," Ken Kimathi sat quietly at the Kiambu Law Courts on Wednesday. His expressions betrayed little of the gravity of the case he faces. Now, the 27-year-old is charged with the murder of Seth Nyakio, a businesswoman and the only daughter of Kirinyaga County nominated ward representative Lucy Njeri. If convicted, Mr. Kimathi faces up to 40 years in prison. Ms. Nyakio was found dead on October 14th of 2024, an apartment in Biafra Estate, that is in Thika Town, Kiambu County. The house belonged to her friend Phoebe Mwende, who told detectives from Thika police station that she had left Ms. Nyakio alone in the apartment only to return later and find her lifeless body. And investigators say Mr. Kimathi was involved in a turbulent relationship with Ms. Mwende, and the family members and detectives familiar with the early stages of the probe told Nation that Kimathi had repeatedly accused Ms. Nyakio of pressuring Ms. Mwende to end the relationship. And these details emerged even when Mr. Kimathi appeared before the Kiambu resident magistrate Nelian Nganga for a mention. Right? That's a story exclusively on page 2 and 3 of the Daily Nation. And 5 companies linked to Wamatangi slapped with account freezes by court. Of course, we just saw just a few days ago the property belonging to Kiambu governor, that is Kimani Wamatangi, was actually, that is along Nyayo Stadium, was actually demolished during the night. The governor actually says that they had court orders to bar the eviction, but they woke up only to find that his property was actually demolished. Of course, yesterday, the court lifted a ban where they said that they have frozen his accounts, bank accounts for him, his children, his wife, and of course some few other people linked to this particular case. Right now, that's a story on page 2. Now let's take a look at that particular story. And the High Court has extended orders freezing the 5 bank accounts linked to Kiambu governor, that is Kimani Wamatangi, and his relatives of allegations that he acquired more than 813 million Kenya shillings corruptly while serving as a senator. Now, the extension following an initial order issued last year preserves the funds pending the conclusion of investigations. The Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, that is the EACC, said it has completed its probe and intends to proceed with a petition to recover and forfeit the money to the state. Now the freeze will remain in effect until April 2nd, when the institution is set to formation before presiding judge of the High Court's Anti-Corruption Division. Now EACC also alleges that Mr. Wamatangi abused his position as a member of the Senate Committee on Roads, Transport and Housing, engaging in fraudulent activities and mispresenting facts to influence procurement processes. Now the frozen accounts of registered under King Group Company Limited, King Realtors Limited, King Construction Company Limited, Quick Fix Auto Garage Limited, and Lab Plus Oil and Energy Company Limited. Now the firms are said to be connected to Mr. Wamatangi, his spouse, and of course his siblings, right? And of course, you will remember just some few years ago, we actually saw who was the former Kiambu governor, that is, forgetting his name actually. He was actually sentenced to prison because of this, corruption cases that is in Kiambu County. And is this a Kiambu County, crisis or situation where, governors, sitting governors actually, you'll remember that the former governor also as well, that is Waitito, remember his name, Waitito was actually, ousted from office when he was actually in office, and he was ousted because of corruption-related case, and of course, he was sentenced, right? And is this a Kiambu County situation? Now we've seen that Kimani Wamatangi now is facing corruption charges. Of course, the court has lifted bans to ban his bank accounts of him, his wife, his children, of course, some few other people linked to this particular case. Right? Now let's take a look on other matters making headlines in the Daily Nation. Journalist torture claims reach the Supreme Court, and on a quiet morning in September 2014, a newsroom desk in Nairobi set off to chain of events that will span a decade, traverse 3 courts and land the Kenya's highest bench. Now at the center is a journalist, a robbery claim, a rogue officer, touched to the Director of Criminal Investigation, that is the DCI, and allegations of torture at a police station in Kisumu. Now, central to this case is whether the High Court and the Court of Appeal sanitized an unlawful arrest and awarded token damages. Now, the Supreme Court is to weigh on the lower courts failed Justice Mr. Justice Ochieng, who says he was unlawfully arrested, assaulted, and silenced for doing his job. The Court of Appeal dismissed his bid for enhanced damages and upheld the 100 award Kenya shillings. Of course, that's a story also exclusively on page 3 involving, members of the Fourth Estate, that is the media and journalist large. Right? Now let's take a look on what's making headlines in the Standard newspaper this particular morning. And the top story on the Standard newspaper this morning is NYS third bombshell. All right? And we've seen the NYS having scandals in previous years. Now let's take a look on what the Standard has to say in regards to this particular story. And shocking revelations by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission suggest that the National Youth Service remains a cash cow for tenderpreneurs if the claims withstand scrutiny in court. Now in the latest scheme, Ben Geddy and his associates were accused of billing the government more than 6.2 billion Kenya shillings for supplies allegedly delivered to the service, but an inspection of NYS stores found no evidence that items such as boots and cooking oil were ever supplied. Even the supposed deliveries of pineapples and corned beef existed only on paper. But there is a twist. The Director of Public Prosecution says the evidence is faulty and the case is weak. All right? That's the story on page 4 of the Standard newspaper. And of course, you'll remember that this is actually not the first time that there is an NYS scandal. Some time back, the NYS was actually, especially when it was first introduced, it used to have scandals. Now let's take a look on what the Standard has to say in regards to this particular story. And investigators claim that the latest NYS scandal, Kenyans almost paid 6.2 billion Kenya shillings for food. Now the youth service never ate, uniforms it never wore, boots that never touched the ground, and diesel that never burned. However, the suspects may not go to full trial as a standoff between the Ethics and the Anti-Corruption Commission, that is the EACC, and the office of the DPP threatens to derail the case. Now, while the EACC claims it has watertight evidence to prosecute, the DPP, Renson Igonga, has twice in separate letters dismissed the scheme, stating that there is no evidence to recommend criminal charges against the suspects led by businessman Ben Gethi Wangui. Now, Gethi first hit the headlines in 2015 when the infamous 791 million Kenya shilling scandal NYS Season 1 erupted after investigators uncovered the loss of millions through irregular payments to a network of companies for suppliers allegedly delivered to the youth agency. Now, this, together with a second wave of 468 million Kenya shillings NYS, two scandals shocked Kenyans, prompting arrests, parliamentary probes, and the suspension of senior government officials, including former devolution PSS, that is Peter Mangiti, and Youth Affairs PS Lillian Omolo. Investigators now allege that as Kenyans focused on the earlier scandal, suppliers and insiders were quietly preparing for a far more audacious fraud, one that relied not on immediate cash transfers but on carefully manipulated paperwork. Right? That's also an unfolding scandal in the NYS, that is the National Youth Service. Right? Now, on page 5 as well is matters across our borders, and the elections that were held in Uganda yesterday. In Uganda, elections marred by delays, technical hitches. Now, the Ugandan presidential election was marred by technical hitches, mostly the failure of biometric kits. Now, key opposition presidential candidate, that is Robert Kyagulanyi, alias Bobi Wine, of the National Unity Platform, that is NUP, complained of foul play in the favor of President Yoweri Museveni. Bobi Wine told reporters in Kampala that the Electoral Commission, that is the EC, officials may have deliberately tampered with the kits to interfere with the voter identification process. Now, the Daily Monitor reported that Bobi Wine voted under a tense atmosphere at Freedom Square in Magere, Wakiso district. He criticized the rollout to the biometrics kits, which failed despite the commission spending billions of shillings to procure them. Now, he condemned the arrest of NUP candidate and deputy president of the Western Region, Jacqueline Joly, who he said was driven to the army barracks together with other agents and electoral materials intended for use in the elections. Yoweri Museveni, that is the president who had voted earlier, also said that EC staff may have deliberately interfered with the chemist kits, leading to the machines malfunctioning. Right? And of course, there are pictures there on page 5 of the Standard newspaper, where officials from Uganda Electoral Commission check the names of voters in the voters register before allowing them to cast their votes during Uganda's 2026 general elections at a polling station in Kampala. That was yesterday. Of course, that's a story exclusively on page 5 of the Standard newspaper. Now, listen to this particular story. A man sues Safaricom in mobile phone number ownership pro. Right? Does a person own a mobile number once he or she purchases it from a telecommunication company, and can it be transferred to a new owner without consent? Now, this is the question that the High Court will determine in a landmark case filed by Peter Moneki against the Communications Authority of Kenya, that is CA, a mobile service provider, and the new liner owner, Dead Silver International Limited. Now, in a case filed before the High Court, Mwaniki said that he lives in America but has his roots in Kenya. He said he brought a Safaricom line and used it for many years. He explained that he co-owned Dead Silver with his sister, Juliet Wanjiro Maina. He said that following civil cases between him and Wanjiro, they struck a consent in which he agreed to resign from Dead Silver and transfer his shares to her. Nevertheless, he said that the consent did not involve him surrendering the mobile number. Now, he told the court that sometime in 2024, while he was in the US, Safaricom assigned the number to the company. And according to him, this was a change of ownership without his consent or participation. Now, the judge further alleged that he discovered that the line had a new owner when he landed in Kenya in 2025 and sought to replace misplaced SIM card. He said that he wrote to both the communication company and the CA seeking to have the number reversed to him, but he did not get a solution. Mwaniki said that the transfer was a violation of his right to privacy, that parties would have access to his history, including financial transactions. Right? That's a story on page 3. You know, someone sues Safaricom of giving the number to another owner. Right? That's on page 3, exclusively on page 3 on the Standard newspaper this particular morning. Now let's take a look on the corridors of justice as well. Suspects in 1.2 million heroin seizure freed on bond. Now, a man charged with trafficking heroin worth 1.19 million Kenya shillings has been released on 100,000 bond. Nakuru's senior principal magistrate Vincent Adate released Efantes Karaoke after the director of criminal investigations failed to convince the court to detain him for 7 days to allow them to conclude investigations. And according to the court documents, Karaoke was arrested on January 13 in Nakuru County while trafficking narcotics. Now, Detective Simeon Moti said he wanted to hold the suspect to allow them establish the source of the drugs and conduct analysis on the substance. And now the suspect was allegedly found in possession with 397 grams of cannabis worth 270 shillings. Now, Karaoke opposed that the application stating that he transported the parcel without knowledge of its content. Now, this is a man who has been released on bond of 100,000 Kenya shillings over a 1.9 million Kenya shillings, drug trafficking. All right, that's on page 3 as well on the Standard newspaper. Now let's take matters education. Of course, this particular week we've seen grade 10 students actually transitioning to the secondary schools, and of course that's a story on page 3 and how pending books bills could mark grade 10 transition. Of course, in the better part of this particular week we saw parents who are taking their children to school. We actually saw parents lamenting the high cost of stationery and books that their children are supposed to be admitted with. And of course, the high cost of uniforms as well. Now, in a crisis could be looming for grade 10 learners as the government delays to the disbursement of funds for the publishing of and printing of textbooks. At the time enrollment, the government had not released funds for grade 10 textbooks, adding that 5.4 billion Kenya shillings in pending bills for grade 8 and 9 textbooks. Now, the pending bills have been blamed for delays in publishing the printing textbooks. The callers noted that books ought to have been delivered to schools before learners reported. Now, the pending bills have been blamed for delays in publishing the printing books, and publishers and printers for grade 10 textbooks are now in the race against time to meet the distribution deadline at the end of this month. With grade 10 enrollment underway, thousands of learners are set to begin classes, but schools are still awaiting the delivery of textbooks. That's a story as well on page 3 of the Standard newspaper. Now let's take a look on matters to do with justice. And LSK, that is the Law Society of Kenya, sues AG and Health Ministry over 209 billion Kenya shillings data deal with US. Now, the Law Society of Kenya has sued the government, challenging the 209 billion between Kenya and the United States. LSK, in its case before the High Court, argues that the Health Operation Framework and Data Sharing Agreement seeks to bypass the construction of the Constitution, as the US will, for the 7 years, have unfettered access to Kenya's health data store and use it without clear remedy to data rejects. Now, LSK lawyer Kevin Omwanza said already there are complaints by Kenyans on their right to privacy and right to self-determination. He assessed that although the deal touched the lives of any Kenyan who visits a hospital, the framework signed by Prime Cabinet Secretary Musalia Mudavadi on behalf of Kenya was not subjected to public participation or adopted by Parliament as required by law. Now that's a story on page 2 of the Standard newspaper now. Mackenzie told his followers that Jesus would not return because they were, quote unquote, unclean. Now, a police officer has testified before the court that controversial preacher Paul Mackenzie told his followers in Kilifi County's Shakahola Forest that they were unclean to meet Jesus. Chief Inspector Peter Kamau told Justice Diana Muchache that Mackenzie told followers Jesus was not coming because they were unclean and that they had to fast and die to meet him. Now, the officer said Mackenzie had initially told the masses that they were supposed to fast for a period of 1,260 days, all right, in Shakahola, that they referred to as the wilderness. Now, Mackenzie soon gave an order of fasting whereby children were to begin, followed by women, and men will be the last ones to die. Now, the officer revealed that there were 211 cases of children below 18 years and 147 adults who starved. Mackenzie told his followers that they would not, or that they would only be safe to fast in Shakahola, that is 70 kilometers from Malindi, and far away from the reach of police and away from the outside world. Kamau told the judge that Mackenzie used twisted verses to mislead the followers. All right, that's exclusively on page 2 of the Standard, and this is quite unfortunate. This particular massacre unfolded in just a few years ago, where we saw hundreds of people, hundreds of bodies being exhumed in the Shakahola, and of course later on we actually saw others in Kobenzaro area, that is also in the coastal region, and it's quite unfortunate to see people preaching cultic, quote unquote, religion. How can you tell someone to fast for 1,224 days? All right, that's quite unfortunate, and of course we hope that justice will be served to the families. Families need closure, and of course, people should actually, stop these cultic religions, to at least, save our country. All right, it is exactly 59 minutes past the top of the hour, and 1 minute to the top of the hour. We're taking a short breather here on the program, The Drift, but we'll be back in just a bit.